All right, we're about to start here. I'm hoping you're having a great summit so far. What do you say? All right, yeah, I learned tons of stuff. Okay, so this is going to be a session about a CI/CD tool called Jenkins. Well, Jenkins historically is an open source tool, and it stays like that for a long time now, and it's been developed also for a long time. And unsurprisingly, with time, it improved to a point where you can actually use it for multiple different reasons. And one of those reasons would be to use it with PowerShell to empower you and your team to do more by doing less, obviously. And that's what I'm going to talk about. So a little bit about me. My name is Kirill Kravtsov. I'm a DBA at XMatters. Actually recently switched from SQL Server to Postgres, which was exciting, but also very difficult. I'm a PowerShell enthusiast and a contributor to the DBA Tools PowerShell module, which has now more like, 500 commands in it, and loads like 10 seconds load time. That's as good as it gets. And a great DevOps supporter, well, I think. And we'll see it in about 20 minutes from now. OK, so today, the agenda is going to be pretty short. And in no particular order, I will be talking about Jenkins, what it is, its components, how it interacts with PowerShell, how it interacts with source control, and how you can bind it all together. So as the Jenkins.io website states, it is leading open source automation server, yada, yada. And it has a really nice picture, if you ask me. And actually, they promote Jenkins by creating multiple versions of this guy with a towel here in different costumes. And you will see some of them throughout the presentation. How do you get Jenkins? Well, pretty simple. Jenkins is literally a Java application, so it's a jar file that you can download from the web and run with your version of Java of choosing. You can download it as a Docker container and run it on your Docker server. And actually, that is my now favorite way of running Jenkins, because you can pretty much destroy the container anytime, spawn a new version, preserve the configuration, because you can map the configuration folder inside Docker. That's exactly how I'm running it right now in my lab. Pretty convenient. Now, how do you access it? It's very simple. You get to the local host. And for the first time, you will log into the Jenkins server, and it will ask you to press next, next, next. And it will set it up for you. Before I go to the demo, which is coming right away, a few things about how people use Jenkins. So most of them, I hope they will resonate very powerfully with the PowerShell community. And I heard, like throughout the summit, a lot of use cases for Jenkins. For instance, you can use it as job scheduler, CI validator, application builds, and then maybe people learn more about random cat facts. So here are some cat facts. This is my cat. OK, so let me show you what Jenkins looks like. This is your initial Jenkins web page. As you can see, minimalistic pretty much. Nothing special, really. So on the left, you here have like Jenkins main menu. This is how you manage Jenkins. You go here, and then there's plenty of configuration items. I want to actually go as far as going through multiple configuration options Jenkins provides you. I will be more talking about the easiest way to start being addicted to Jenkins, let's say. So the first thing that we're going to do here is pretty much go and create a new job for us. So that's mostly what we're going to be doing today, creating different jobs, seeing different job configurations, and how they interact with our code. So what we're going to do here, there's a new item button. You click this button, and you input a random job name. Then you choose one of the project styles. Basically, this will tell Jenkins which job template to use, and it will have really different configuration options. So the freestyle project is where you want to start with Jenkins. Freestyle project is your drag and drop, click and result kind of experience. You have a pre-style project, you click OK here, and then here's your first Jenkins job. Description, bunch of configurations. There's really a lot to go through when you first open Jenkins, but it kind of starts to make sense the more you use it. So for example, here, there is a lot of configuration options that you can enable. And for example, here you can specify whether you want to use a source code. Here you can specify whether you want to throttle builds a little bit. Do you want to use parameters? Do you want to use some different triggers? For example, if you want your job to be scheduled to run at a certain point in time, which is a very common use scenario. You can have here like build periodically and then specify your random cron schedule, execute every minute on the first day of the month. Sounds like a good idea. Now, you can also trigger it by SCM, which is very convenient. You can push commits to your Git repository, for example, and have your job triggered automatically. A nice feature that I use all the time. And then, well, all the top part is your first initial configuration environment kind of thing. And once you specify that, you go ahead and add a build step. So build step is your building blocks of what Jenkins Job actually does. In this case, you can select multiple things here, and you can install plugins, of which I'm going to talk later, to extend this list. But for now, we're going to use a Windows PowerShell plugin, which provides us just with one single thing. This is a command that we're going to run. So for our first job, I'm going to use this little code here, which would obviously do some cat facts for us. Let me do a little editing here. I don't really want to validate parameters here because it's a simple plain text script. But basically, this is a speech recognition. I'm going to be using Microsoft David desktop voice of the speech recognition synthesizer. And I'm going to use a API of the cat fact ninja. So we saved our job. Now, next thing we do, we build it. So this is how you start the job. Build schedule, it will appear here in the build history. And it will fail. So why did it fail? Because I run it in a container. So container doesn't have Microsoft voices at all. And I don't think it would actually interact with your audio system. So one of the important things here is that you can have more than one agent. Even though I run Jenkins in a container, you can spawn multiple agents. You can have them across your whole environment in different spots with different operating systems, with different credentials, whatnot. And the way to actually choose where you want to run, there is a parameter here, restrict where this project can be run. And I'm going to use one of the labels that I assigned to my current agent. So I have Windows agent, and I have a Windows label. This is a lie. So let me save it and rebuild it again. So now,
did you know? A cat's normal pulse is 140 to 240 beats per minute, with an average of 195.
Cool. OK, so this is how Jenkins interacts with a different operating system. Right? So remember, we're running it in a container. Container is some Ubuntu random thing. And we just connected to the Windows machine without actually specifying the connection strings and authentication, anything like that. So that's the way for you to scale your environment, to have multiple options of how you want to execute it, and also to pool your resources. All right, so this was a success. Let's see what else do we have. This is roughly what Jenkins looks like if you try to kind of think about it as a system. So right on the top, you have the web UI. with which we just interacted. It also has a full REST API, so anything you do with the web UI, you can do with the REST API and call it from PowerShell and whatnot. Jenkins Master is what I run inside the container, so it has all the configuration stored inside. And it has definitions, it has plugins, it has schedules and whatnot. And basically, it's like a bunch of configuration files. And when I say bunch, like a few thousands. And each master can have more than one agent, obviously. And on the right-hand side, you see there are a number of agents you can connect to the Jenkins using completely different methods. So one of them would be SSH. So you can create an SSH connection and specify a certificate or a key to connect to your SSH machine, and it would create a Jenkins agent there. Or you can use Java application that will automatically connect to the server. Let's actually talk a little more about agents. Each agent has executors. So what does it mean? It's pretty much memory space inside Java process, which allows you to run one single command. Each job will use explicitly one of the executors, or rather each build, because job can actually have more than one things to do at once, run on more than one agents or executors. And then each agent can only have a certain number of executors. I don't think there is actually a physical limit. The limit is the sky, but the sky in our case would be like things like memory, CPU usage, and maybe even disk. But I would probably start, if you want like scaled environment, number of CPUs as a rule of thumb, and then go from there. Each agent has a root directory where it stores the configurations and binaries. And most importantly, it has a workspace inside. So workspace is where the job actually executes. This is the working directory where your scripts run, where the SCM checks out, where all the temporary files are created during the run by default. Of course, you can create them elsewhere. Like I said, you can have different launch methods here. You can start Jenkins as Windows service and has it run as a service account. You can have it as an SSH and then connect to a Linux machine. You can start as a jar file and interact with the desktop. And you can run it as a Docker container by downloading a Docker plugin and then having, for each job, spawning a new Docker container, then running the job and destroying the container. Everyone's happy. And as you just seen, you can also use labels, which would pretty much tell you, Jenkins, where do you want your project to be run. So for example, you can have a production agent with production permissions that only can connect to production servers. And then you can have development agent, where you would run your development kind of environment jobs. Let me show you really quickly what the Jenkins Master and Jenkins Agent folders look like. So here is our Jenkins home for the master, and this is our Jenkins Master. As you see, there's plenty of files. You can see jobs here, logs, keys, secrets, plugins, all kinds of stuff. And Jenkins Agent's home would be much more simple. It has a binary, it has a configuration, and it has a workspace. And it has a jar file, which is essentially what Jenkins is. Okay, so Jenkins jobs. When you create a Jenkins job, there's a lot of things that you can specify at the beginning. And you just saw that there's plenty of checkboxes that you can click. It's kind of nice. But I'd like to refer to Jenkins execution as 3 different tasks that it goes through. Like pre-build tasks is how you specify your environment, how you define your environment variables, let's say. Or do you want to clean up your workspace before the job execution starts? Do you want to check out some SCM? And things like that. There is also a build phase where you actually run what you need to run. You start your PowerShell, you execute some jobs, you do whatever. And then after that is done, there is post-build. And that's where you make use of what your build has produced. So let's say it produced a JSON file that you want to publish somewhere, or it's produced the HTML file that you want to publish to the website, or you want to send an email about the job failure or completion. And that's the post-build task that you will define, which would execute after the job is completed. You can trigger the jobs in multiple ways. You can trigger manually, just like we did right now. We could schedule it. We could trigger it from different jobs. We could trigger them by pushing commits to SCM, and such multiple triggers, actually, that you can implement. And like I said earlier, this is all extensible through the plugins. Parameters. Every job can have different parameters, and I'm just going to show you in a few seconds how it works. And build history is where your execution history is stored, obviously. It contains things like builds. It contains things like tracking changes from SCM. So let's say you pushed 5 commits, and you would see what changed between the previous execution and current execution. And let's see, what do we have here? So we completed level 1. Let's upgrade to level 2 now. Before we went to upgrading our catfax job, I'm going to just quickly show you how the parameters work. Once again, I'm using Freestyle Project. And in this case, I'm going to check this box. This project is parameterized. And I'm going to add a bunch of different parameters to this job. So I will add Boolean parameter. I will add choice parameter. And name it choice. And string parameter, password parameter. You can see there's a whole bunch of them. But for the most of the time, you would use Boolean, choice, string. And how exactly parameters work in Jenkins. And most importantly, how would we interact with them in PowerShell? Pretty simple. They are environment variables. In here, let me really quickly add a build step that will do get child item env. So we will list all the environment variables. OK, I like this one. So we just executed the build. It will probably fail again because I forgot to specify the label. Of course it did. When you didn't do that, it will randomly pick a free agent and then run it there. OK, where is it? Here we go. I actually can click the rebuild last, and it will show me all the parameters that I used last time and just reuse them, which is kind of cool when you have a job with 10 parameters. Each of them you meticulously copied from different sources, and then you suddenly lost it. So let me refresh this page. OK, so now this build has completed, and we can, if we go to the build, you can have your console output here, and you will have your build information here. And you can actually review what parameters you used when you triggered it. But let's see the console output. So in here, you can see all kinds of different things that Jenkins has defined. Things like Hudson Home. Hudson is the old name for Jenkins. So don't be alarmed if you see this name. A bunch of other auto-defined variables. You can actually have things like Git, SCM repository data. You can have all your normal environment variables. And if we check our variables here, so this is the one that we defined. An interesting thing about this one, so you can see the value is true, but this is actually a string. So this is not your Boolean value because, well, obviously environment variables, they don't really know what Boolean type is. So everything here is a string. And when you use it in PowerShell, you would have to kind of adapt accordingly to what you're receiving from Jenkins. But let's go back to our second level. So I have created this job here, Speak to Me, that will try to abstract some of the stuff we used in the cat facts. Inside this job, I'm using several things that we didn't use before. So first of all, obviously parameter. I'm actually providing user an option to input a phrase that we want the computer to speak out loud. Then we provide him a choice, whether it's going to be a male or female voice. Then we limit it to the windows, obviously. And most importantly, now I'm storing this in Git. This is the address of my repository. I'm connecting it using certain credentials. And instead of running plain text PowerShell, which I probably would not recommend to anyone who creates a script with more than 2 lines, you just execute the PS1 file from the current folder and provide all the parameters in a similar manner. So you see here, this is the environment variable. Oh my God. And this is exactly how you address them. So this is classic PowerShell way of using variables from the OS. OK, so let's build it, and let's see how it handles that. So in this case, I'm going to use female voice for a change. As you can see, I've tested quite a while this job.
PowerShell is cool.
I know, right? So in here, there is some new entries that we can see now. A bunch of git fetch stuff. So this is how the job executed git commands to get my code from the Git repository. OK. Sounds pretty cool. So what do we have here? Oh my God. Let's move on. Artifacts and logs. No, you don't do that. Sorry, my mouse is kind of sliding down here because the table is not level. OK, good. So they are a part of the build. Once you completed the build, you can actually refer it to from the user interface. And you can keep it pretty much indefinitely unless you want to clean them up with the time. You can use log rotation options, such as only keep like 30 builds on the disk, or keep like 30 days of builds on the disk. Artifacts is what you produce by your build. So it can be binary, it can be a log file, it can be a web page, it can be anything. So pretty much any file you produce through your build can become an artifact. So why it can become? Because you need to actually explicitly define what is artifact in your build. And if we go to the level 3, let's see the version 2 of cat facts. In this case, I'm actually calling the script here to generate some artifacts for us. In this case, it's going to be INI file that I'm going to use for a different reason. And this reason is I want to actually trigger the job that we just created that speaks out loud any random phrase and pass it some parameters from another job. There are multiple ways you can do it. Like you can specify explicit parameters from the field, like this. Predefined parameters, and then you like param1 equals this, param2 equals that, and so on. But in this case, I decided to generate some artifacts, which is the catfact2.ini, and use that file as a parameter file that will be used to trigger the other job. So what do we have here? No, I don't want to save anything. We'll trigger it. Once again, here you only specify the voice because the catfact will come from the API. So let's build it and see how it goes. So this is build number 6.
Cats do not think that they are little people. They think that we are big cats. This influences their behavior in many ways.
Meow. So this is our artifacts here. If I refresh the page, you can see last successful artifact. And this is our INI file. If you open it, of course, with a notepad, you see that there is a phrase equals, and then a large string. So this is how you pass the parameter inside a file. And if you go to this little trend button here, I actually find it very useful. You will see the timeline and the build time trend throughout your execution history. So let's say your job is roughly executing, 30 seconds, and then suddenly you have a spike like 5 minutes. Obviously, something is wrong. So this is a great way of discovering that something is going on in your environment. And then here you will have things like, okay, let's pick another one. Let's speak to me because we just executed it a bunch of times. So here you would have actually a schedule how your job has been executed. You see here little blue lines. They are too short because the jobs are like only a few seconds long. But if the job takes you like 30 minutes to complete, you would actually see a huge line depicting you how long your job has been executed, which is a pretty nice feature out of the box. Okay. Yeah, so you can go inside the build itself and then see the execution history, the changes. There is a change button. Will show nothing because I never updated Git with anything. But for one of the previous versions where I actually pushed some code to Git, it will show me the last commit message. And that's it for the artifacts and logs. Any questions so far? Fire away.
Can you tell a reliable way to repeatedly execute the job with the password parameter or with something else? Secure way?
OK, so the question was, is there a secure way to execute the job with a password parameter? And the answer is yes. And there is, in Jenkins, when you configure the job, and when you define the parameter, there is actually a secure password parameter, which will not show you the password, obviously. So let's see how it works. You can actually see that this is not displayed. But if we go here,
Quirky.
wow, nothing. So that's one secure way. The other secure way is you can define environment variable and pass it to the job using certain plugins, or you can define it globally on the Jenkins level and then use it in your build as an variable parameter, environment variable parameter. OK, so what else do we have here? Job types. So let's dig into this a little bit. Freestyle is your bread and butter of Jenkins. So when you want something dirty quickly, Freestyle is the best option. You can define everything with your web interface. You can click your mouse and create a bunch of jobs and a bunch of steps. But there are other exciting features. Things like pipeline, where you can actually write the script for your execution. You will define stages. You will define actions. There are two different ways of approaching the pipeline, and I actually found them very intimidating at first. But then with time, when you start to understand how Jenkins works, it's actually pretty self-explanatory how it works. It's basically your PowerShell function in function in function. And there is declarative pipeline, which you declare explicitly how the pipeline runs, like row by row. Or you can actually write a script that will dynamically add job steps based on some environment configurations or parameters or settings. Then there is a multi-branch pipeline. And this is an ideal solution for homegrown CI. Why? Because it is able to scan Git for multiple branches, multiple PRs even, and then execute the job every time there is some change. So this is an optimal way when you want to introduce a change to your job or script or code or configuration. You can ensure that it still works as expected and trigger CI build just by creating a new branch and pushing it. And now, the last one that I wanted to mention is a multi-configuration job. It is very useful when you want to define, let's say, we want to trigger backups using Jenkins. And we have like 4 different environments. So do we want really to trigger 4 different jobs, to create 4 different jobs for each environment? Obviously not. But then we still want to have some kind of separation because, well, let's say you run the backup for everything at once, and then your dev environment fails, and the job fails right away for some reason. You didn't write it properly or something. Now your production hasn't been back up. How about that? So that's one of the things where the multi-configuration job will help you. So you can define different runtime parameters, and it will spawn several jobs at once for you to run with those parameters. And let's actually see how it works. So now we're going to level 4. Wait a second. I forgot about one thing. So when you're publishing the artifacts, I totally forgot about that. You can actually publish an HTML file as a web page, which is very convenient. So for example, this job here gathers information about processes and services. I didn't want to do anything really complicated. So it's basically archiving the HTML file. And then if you go to HTML report button here, which appears after you publish the HTML artifact, it will actually show you the web page. So now you don't need to have a web server for the stuff that you generate in PowerShell. So you generate HTML file, you published it, it's available, it has a permanent address. You can send it via email, or you can publish it elsewhere. You can actually switch between tabs here, which is very convenient, I think, but my HTML skills could use some love. Okay, so now we're going to the configurations. I have 2 jobs here. Countdown, let's talk a little bit about that. As you can see, it has a slightly different interface. Now it has phases, or rather stages, to go through. So I have a stage announce, a stage count, and bombs away. Spoiler, no bombs here. What it actually does, it does what it says. It does a countdown for us using the same voice recognition. And if we go to the configuration, it is a different kind of job. So it is still parameterized, but here we have a pipeline instead of the build steps. And this pipeline, if you look closer, is actually very self-explanatory. So here we have an agent section where we defined where exactly we want to run this job. In this case, I'm running it in master because all it's got to do is going to build a different job for me here. So this is a step that builds another job, and you then provide a bunch of parameters. And after that, it does it dynamically. Here is your loop, where you can build multiple jobs at once using a simple loop. So it's just an example how exactly you can use the pipeline with dynamic jobs inside Jenkins. And just to show you what the pipeline script is. So this is our job, nothing more here. So let's actually try to run it. So we will say, OK, run countdown from 5, and then do something. One thing, if you're running Jenkins, there is some overheads, obviously, for spawning the process, for checking out Git Repository every time you trigger the job. And you can see that actually it takes some time for it to process all these things. So first of all, checked out one.
Performing the act of ultimate doom.
Thank you. You can see the pauses are really long. Like, it is incredible to actually wait until it finishes the countdown without running out of the time limit. So what we're going to do here, I'm just going to, you know what, I don't want to wait for this thing. I want to cancel this job. And now the build has stopped. Hopefully. Yes, thank you. What are we going to do here? We're going to make one small modification to the job. In here, I'm going to make all the jobs. Oh, this is convenient. Not to wait for the job to complete. So I'm changing this parameter here. Let me probably add this to first job call as well. OK, you know what? I don't care. And I'm just going to retrigger it, but this time, you know what, let's keep it at 3. I still want to make it in time. Of course, the first job, because I didn't modify the first job call, will make it.
Performing the act of ultimate doom.
Thank you again. Will take a little bit more time, but now that we executed the count, you see it is executed immediately, 500 milliseconds, because it never waited for the job to finish. Now, if you go to the main interface,
2.
you see a bunch of jobs running.
Did you know? 1. The first cat show was in 1871 at the Crystal Palace in London.
Perfect. So as you can see, it actually executed the jobs at the same time, which didn't make a perfect countdown as well. And that's the thing that you will have to kind of manage on your own. I don't think that in the grand scheme of things, it actually matters if the job runs with a 20-second delay. But for the sake of this presentation, I think this is very important. Anyways, so I couldn't resist, and I created the matrix job, which calls the matrix. In here, the only matrix that I actually use is which voice I want to use to quote this matrix. So I have a choice parameter with a bunch of quotes from the matrix. And I have this configuration matrix here with user-defined access. So our access would be a voice and values, male and female, obviously. So that creates 2 different configurations for one single job. You can also define labels here to ensure that your job will run on multiple agents. Let's say you want to build your job or test your script against Linux and Windows. So that's where you can actually do that from one single job, using different labels to run the build. As you can see here, I'm triggering the speak to me job again, but I'm using the voice variable, which comes from the matrix. So this is our matrix definition. And essentially, this is the notation you use inside Jenkins when you want to use environment variables. So this is not PowerShell. This is Jenkins. And this is what you would write if you want to use an environment variable that was generated by Jenkins parameter. OK, so let's see what it gives us. Let's build it with parameters. I like this one. So you can see it actually executed the job twice.
You can't be dead because I love you.
Wow.
Now
get up.
Awesome. OK, and here, if we go to the build, you can actually see that it's successfully built. It was successfully built for both configurations, male and female. You can go into each one of them and see the console output, and then see that it's actually triggering another project here. All right, so level 5 is done. And we are very close to the end. Plugins. Like this awesome picture here, which depicts this robot that comes to the rescue when the 5 lines collide together. What's the name again? Voltron. Yes, thank you. It's my favorite cartoon in my childhood. Anyways, you can use dozens and dozens of plugins in Jenkins, which are available totally for free from the plugin repository. So if you go to Jenkins, manage plugins, so you can see that now I have some updates on my Jenkins instance. I'm not going to run it, just because I'm afraid that I would break anything. But I must say, I use Jenkins for like 3 years now, never broke anything by updating the plugin. But if we go to the Available tab, you can now see that there is quite a few plugins here, and I didn't even go through like 1/10 of it, which means you would have to actually Google for plugins, because there is, of course, there is a filter. So let's say you want to find a plugin that does add some more parameters. It's still quite a list, and you don't really know what it does, but each parameter has its own page, and you can then check it and then install without restart, and it would be available to you most likely without restart. And you can check what plugins you have installed. You can also specify some proxy configuration if you need, and stuff like that. So that's how you extend your Jenkins. I don't think you can actually manually install plugins. It's always, no, actually you can. If you put it in your Jenkins home, over here, plugins, that's where all the plugins living, basically. So you can extend Jenkins like that. Next one is for your future reference. This is the plugins that I find very useful. I will share the slides, of course. And I extensively use most of them. Especially, I would probably note Active Directory plugin, which helps me to integrate with Active Directory. I can authenticate as a LDAP user. I use the email extension plugin, which allows you to send more detailed emails and stuff like that. Rebuilder is your rebuild button that I just showed you to remember to rebuild the failed job without specifying all the parameters manually. Scm integration. Why would you use Scm integration? Why would you ever use Git? Well, it's quite obvious, actually. It gives you a power in your hands to control how you develop your code, how you share your code, how do you track your code, how do you track changes, and how you allow other people to improve your code. Jenkins miraculously works with any kind of SCM, and really, I found it a really pleasant experience to use Jenkins with SCM because of all these things here. And most importantly is CI. So this is the end of the session, and this is a great time for this question. So anyone here write PowerShell scripts? I guess so. It's really good to know your target audience in time. Well, out of all these people, who write tests for your code? There should be more hands in the auditory. And I will explain why. How do you know that you change your code and it still works? Well, you tested it in dev, right? But did you actually test every single possible scenario how you execute it? Did you actually took into consideration that when you execute it, it would probably run in a different environment? So CI helps you with checking all those check marks and testing your code. Jenkins will help you here with using certain PowerShell modules. One of them would be pester, of course. You can write pester tests to validate your scripts. And the syntax is really simple. I would highly recommend watching test-driven development session by SQL DBA with a beard. And he does a great job in explaining how exactly you would use pester to test your code. How you would integrate it into Jenkins using Jenkins File. So Jenkins File is basically Jenkins file, literally, quite literally, which contains the pipeline syntax that we just seen in the different job. So here I have my folder with all these amazing cat facts here, and I created a development branch, which I'm going to switch to. And this development branch actually has a new file called Jenkins File. Okay, that didn't work as I expected it would. Come on. Oh, God. Anyways, so this is a Jenkins file. This is your pipeline. All it does, installs a pester module to the machine where you run it, and then executes a ci pester.ps1. Inside this folder, this is a script that basically will trigger every pester test that you have inside tests. I wouldn't go into details here, but it will report what failed, and if it failed, then crash the job, basically. And this is a simple test for your file. So in here, you see a context. What are you actually doing? Then I'm mocking a web call because I don't really want to go to internet because I don't really know what it would return me. And I'm telling this, you know what, return me this is a fact all the time. And then I'm validating that the script creates a file, catfact2.ini, which would have a certain contact inside. And this is your phrase. And with this simple approach, now you can create a CI job, which will be connected to your Git repository. You can see this beautiful picture of my GitHub organization. This is the only repository that I really enabled for it, but you can specify a wildcard here and have more than one. Inside this repository, you have branches. Only one branch has been recognized by having Jenkins file inside it, so this is why it is here. And I actually have a pull request closed. You can see it's scratched here. But how does it work? We can go into the configuration. And this is your connection to the GitHub organization. You use certain credentials. You specify which organization you use. You specify which repositories you use. And then within the repository, what you do. How do you discover what you need to run? So this is your discover branches. This is discover pull requests. And this is your Jenkins file, which this plugin would search for. And if it found it, what it would do, it would trigger it. Every so often, you can schedule your Git repository scan and then go into the log and see that it discovers different branches. It discovered master, it discovered develop, and then it found a Jenkins file. So now that it found a Jenkins file, it will actually, if there are new commits, it will trigger a build that will validate your script and then fail or succeed. And the best thing about it is you can actually go to GitHub. And then where is my repository? So Jenkins lab, go to the development branch. You know what? Actually, let's create a pull request. I'm creating a pull request from the development branch. And what happens now, so I just created a pull request. What happens now, I'm going to scan it. And in the logs, it will detect a new pull request coming. And now it will trigger a build to validate your configuration. So pull requests were proceeded. And maybe it wouldn't, because I already ran it for this commit. So let's change something here. I'll change something really simple, because we're completely out of times here. This is quick commit. This is a push. So now the develop branch has one more commit that it never tested before. And now when I scan this, hopefully it will detect the changes in my Git repository. It will trigger the CI test for me. So let's see the log again. OK. Nothing happens. Wow. Well, supposedly, it would run your CI test here and then fail or succeed. And then it will actually tell GitHub that the build has succeeded. Even from your local network, it will tell GitHub that your code is actually valid. So let me see if I have it here. List of commits. You see this little checkbox here? This is your Jenkins job right here that validated your commit that you pushed through the CI repository. OK, so that's pretty much it. There are some tips and tricks here. Q&A. This is a reminder for me. If you have any questions, fire away.
How are you passing parameters from one job to your
Next job? So the question is, how do you pass parameters from one job to another job? There are multiple ways you can do that. And you actually, in your build phase, you specify, I will go here and just show it. In your build phase, you will have this build step. Trigger call builds on other projects. And this is the parameter of this build step that tells you how exactly you want to provide parameters here. Parameters from properties file is one option. You can also provide current build parameters. So if they have similar parameter names, or actually same parameter names, it will just pass them along. And then there are some other options. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming.